So the first thing we want to do is remind everyone while we're going to give you a fast rundown and we're going to try to run, actually trying to get to more of the conversation here. What's good, what's bad? Well, first of all, let's realize that CVSS, since its inception back in 2003, 2004, into version 1, and you have myself, Dave Dugal, and Nick here who've covered, I think, all aspects of that timeline, is that this is a framework. It's not a standard, and people try to treat it as a standard. And what we've endeavored from the beginning through the current is a matter of how do you approach risk. And in doing that, what we're finding out is that everyone goes for the base score. They're not picking up their part. So to absolutely help everyone, we need to do better on our data. And the data has to do not only with what does the original CNA have to say about the CVE record. After all, the record ID is nothing more than ID. It's the data that goes with the record that makes it meaningful. But if you don't fill this in, no one knows how to evaluate it further on. And then the real question comes down to is, as you use software and it transits throughout the ecosystem, how does it modify? And that's more of a temporal part when you think in 3.1 terms. But the biggest challenge is how do you go to 4.0 to make that decision? Because this is all about helping someone determine risk. That was the whole part that we were looking at. Unfortunately, we reverted to base equals action, and that's not what we should endeavor for. And I think the CVSS SIG has endeavored very hard to change the framework to adopt some of the threat metrics that one should use to help them better understand how to do that. So we're going to go through that in a very quick manner of how it will help you, and to realize that this is about record completeness. And I think part of us in the CVE community need to do is we need to get better data to help this means of assessing your risk. Next slide.
Yeah, so we all know CVSS version 3.1. It's been around for a decade. It's well supported. It has predictable math. You know, we talk about CVE quality and completeness. CVSS is one of those data points, whether you're choosing version 3.1 or 4.0 or both. You know, you could do both. Those are in the context of what is most useful to customers. So 3.1 is great, but there is 4.0 as well. There's a lot more granular impacts. We were just talking about weaknesses versus impacts. So we can talk more about vulnerable system impacts versus subsequent system impacts. And we're talking more about completeness of threat information, environmental. More of the math is balanced with relation to those environmental metrics. That's what some of the numerical changes I'll show here in just a minute, and then some other tweaks and evolutions to the standard in version 4. But version 4 is different. Version 4 is not a drop-in replacement for version 3.1. If you're looking at moving to this, if you're a CNA and you want to support version 4, or if you're a consumer of information CVE and you want to be using that as part of your vulnerability management program, it's not the same. They will be different. The math is different. The numbers are different. It may change decisions in your environment, and you may need to adapt to that. So, just looking at some of the data sets, the overall change across a broad range is very small. It's something like on average a 0.3 or 0.4 numerical change from that 0 to 10, right? But some of the changes are very big. You can see some of these numbers change dramatically. Some of these may be due to errors, and we know there are no errors at all in any of these vulnerability databases. But there can be very individual big changes if you're looking at version 4. So looking at some of these data sets, I looked at ones from Cisco in the broader CVE and as well in GitHub. Some of the sets, if you just eyeball it, 10% of the scores in CVE's record database decreased, but 20% of those increased. And the remaining stayed the same. So it is, it can be a very big set of boundary shifts if you're using version 4 versus version 3.1. So CVSS version 4 is different. Now, these scores will change. They'll They can change qualitative boundaries, those low, medium, high criticals. They can change depending on the nature of the vulnerability itself, depending on the vector string. And managing this change is hard. So if you're looking at moving to version 4, that change can be disruptive. But no matter what you're choosing, that data should help your consumers make decisions, and it's about context. So there's lots of ways that you can manage and mitigate and improve that context-based decisions. We are in the CVSS thing, we're trying to tell this story of don't just base your decision making on the CVSS space score, and that is true of a CNA, and that is true of the CVE consumers. As CNAs, we should help with CVE completeness and giving enough information for our customers to fill out those threat and certainly environmental metrics. And CVSS is a delicious combination of peanut butter and chocolate of EPSS, SSVC, and other standards. These do not exist in a vacuum. We've heard from EPSS and SSVC. It's all about another data point to improving context within those, improving the completeness of CVE. That's the quick run through. And context is all important. So I wanted to leave time here really for to open the floor for questions and any feedback.
If you will, Nick, I think one of the things people should look at, if you go back to the new features slide, is really the base metrics have changed. And with that math of trying to induce in both environmental and threat metrics, we need to help encourage the user population, consumers, but also the if you will, the vuln management providers, the scanning organizations, the ability to understand what this really means. And this becomes more important as you watch more software packages and components transit across multiple software producers and products within, because we really believe the effectiveness is changing, and you need to help reflect that inside the CVSS v4 formula for that version and software product inversion. And we ran with the challenge of either we have too little or way too much. We went with too little. Questions?
Yeah, Pete, to that, we've talked about the context and the problem of CVSS vector strings not appropriate for all instances of that vulnerability in environments, certainly across the supply chain. The CVSS SIG is very aware of that problem. And I think this is a larger issue with CVE. And someone mentioned that previously about supply chain, and 90% of those CVEs don't apply because those components aren't accessible. And that's a very complex problem to solve. So the applicability of any given CVSS vector string to an asset in an environment may be radically different based on the unique assessment of that vulnerability. That's a problem for another time that we are very aware of and trying to solve.
I think one of the challenges I would like to postulate here is between CVSS and maybe the first piece or SIG and the CVE program. We need to really press forward on education communications about this problem set. Because as software producers, and I've talked to many in the incident response community, when we engage with consuming organizations, we're finding that the vuln managers are taking the simple base score and they're not applying either an EPSS, an SVCC, or completing even CVSS, and they're just going with the original CNA says, therefore the rating is, and you patch or don't patch at what speed. And so there's not an application of what is risk here and danger. Dave, you wrote in there, are there helpful documents coming out of the SIG for adoption of V4 is the question, Nick.
I swear that I did not put Dave up to this. The CVSS SIG is working on a consumer implementation guide that will help with some of these things that we're talking about. You will see that very soon. I will be sharing that with the community.
And he really
Not
means
a plan.
they're in edit mode now. So I think that is that Scott. One of the things that we're seeing is there is back when we did CVSS V1, the problem we ran into is people were on 3-point scales, 5-point scales, 10-point scales, and the infamous search CC at 20 to 180. And so there's no common way for our customer to equate all the bulletins coming in. And that's actually what did the common vulnerability reporting format as well, as to get the data across. When you see the 4-point scales, and I can think of 2 notable vendors they were on today using critical, important, moderate, and low. What they're doing is they're doing a severity scale and not a criticality. So the severity is how that CVE applies within a certain piece of software. And then they apply that as a means to guide not only their internal speed of response, but also for external guidance of how to look at it. If you look at it a different way, it's like giving you a temporal score from a software producer's perspective. It still does not negate the final, what is the environmental score for the organization. And there's where we're seeing the problem. So we see the 4-point scale of those levels, the severity levels, as something that augments, just like SVCC does, or SSVC. I always get that wrong, sorry. SSVC or EPSS.
And appetite for risk is difficult. I mean, it's unique to each organization and regulatory bodies and many other questions.
Nick, you want to say why the move to in 4 to incorporating threat? What was the driving factor there? Because I don't think a lot of people understand.
Yeah, I mean, we incorporated both threat and environmental into the mathematical outcomes of that because we're trying to push more consumers to do more appropriate assessments for their own environments. The base score is a vendor agnostic, assuming worst case scenario type of evaluation. Vendors can't always know where systems sit in certain environments. And with having more of an emphasis on those contextual threat and environmental values, it was our hope, although, it's hard work, but it was our hope and still continues to be that consumers of CVSS would take those vector strings, enrich them, and improve the assessments that would then be appropriate to the assets in their own environments. It's hard work, and we're trying to tell that story, and we're, again, releasing that implementation guide here very soon, and along with other things. But how can we all help to aid our customers in better risk decision making by having more complete CVE records? It's something for all of us.
Probably the other reason for moving across from version 3.1 to 4 was to avoid the noticeable change on some assigning CVSS scores where they were actually incorporating temporal into a base score. And we were trying to avoid that problem set.
And some vendors are doing that, and we're having I understand some vendors and providers who want to provide that information, but the problem is it changes over time, and having that in a CVE record means it doesn't get updated, and there's some complexities. So the use cases are still evolving.
And Art, your comments spot on. The challenge is many vuln managers either aren't allowed or aren't willing to take the responsibility to do that work and to apply internally what is known or unknown.
And I don't think a lot of the tooling, certainly not scanning vendors, it's very difficult for them to understand mitigations within environments and other compensating controls that would map to the types of things that CVSS and other scoring systems. So no, it doesn't exist. That's something we've asked and talked to scanning vendors and other vulnerability assessment types of vendors, but that information's hard. it has to come from those asset owners as part of a change management database or other types of asset information. It's hard. Yeah, we all love a number, right?
Number candy, I like that one.
Yeah, I live for Johannes Ulrich to say my CVSS scores on his podcast. I'd love to hear a perfect 10. So I think that was all our questions, and
we'll give 1 minute back. And Nick, I don't know how we did it in under 20, but hey, whatever.
We said we were going to go through it. Appreciate all the questions. Thanks, everybody.